She was the woman whose name never appeared above the title, whose smile lit up scenes, even if her name barely made the credits. A chorus girl, a contract player, a rising starlet with talent in her bones and dreams, stitched between takes, and he was Donald O'Connor, the song and dance man with a 1,000-watt grin, beloved by audiences for his speed, wit, and physical brilliance. A man who could leap off a piano, spin through a sentence, and make America forget its worries in just under 2 minutes of screen time, but behind that polished MGM grin and her practiced glances, there was something real happening, something electric, private, and tender, a romance so genuine it had to be hidden from view. And now, after decades of speculation, whispered recollections, and aging letters left unread in the drawers of an old Hollywood bungalow, we finally know why she dated Donald O'Connor in secret, and why the love they shared was never meant for the cameras. Because at the height of Donald's career, with studios managing every word he said and every step he took, a relationship with a lesser-known starlet was not just frowned upon, it was a liability, a distraction from the clean-cut, boy-next-door image producers had spent years building, and the public had grown to trust. And though he loved her fiercely, and she him, the machine that was classic Hollywood demanded secrecy, demanded silence, demanded that their connection live in the shadows of backlots and parked cars after rap, in brief handwritten notes slipped between wardrobe changes, and for a while, that was enough for her to hear his laughter up close, for him to see her face in the wings while he rehearsed, for them to share the joy of creation and closeness, even if it was just for a few stolen hours. But reality always outpaces romance, and as roles came and went, and the industry grew colder to actresses who didn't become overnight stars, she knew the quiet truth: she could not compete with the public's love for him, could not be the woman who risked his trajectory for the sake of a personal happiness no one would permit. So they ended it not with a fight, but with tears and understanding, both knowing it wasn't lack of love but too much of it that led them to part. And though he went on to marry and she eventually left the industry altogether, their story did not disappear, because decades later, when her granddaughter found a box of personal keepsakes, inside were letters, photos, mementos from a time when their worlds briefly touched, including a note from Donald written in looping pen: "They may never know what we were, but I always will." And in that moment, the truth became clear, that theirs was not a scandal or a forgotten fling, but a full and complicated love kept quiet to protect dreams, reputations, and futures too delicate to risk. And though the world didn't see it then, we see it now, a love story, told not in headlines or red carpets, but in glances, sacrifice, and devotion lived in the margins. And knowing the reason why they kept it secret doesn't just explain the past, it honors it, and reminds us that sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones the world never got to see. And as the years drifted quietly by, and the crowds faded and the glittering promise of Hollywood's golden age softened into shadows and still photographs, she settled into a slower life, far from the Klieg lights and gossip columns that once brushed the edges of her dreams. Content, or at least at peace, to have traded ambition for a kind of quiet dignity. Her face no longer recognized on the street, her name long forgotten by the studios that once called her in for fittings and rehearsals, but never quite made her a star. And yet, she had something none of them knew: she carried a story, a love, a truth pressed between the pages of memory and tucked deep within her heart. And though she never told her children, and rarely spoke his name aloud, Donald O'Connor was never gone from her. Not really, because in the silence of her mornings, with the radio playing old standards, and sunlight filtering through lace curtains, she could still hear his voice in her mind, still see the way he smiled when he was trying not to laugh, still remember the way his hands felt when he would reach for hers behind the soundstage walls. And though it had been decades since they'd parted with soft goodbyes and impossible promises, she sometimes wondered if he remembered too, if he ever thought about the girl in the powder blue skirt, who waited at stage left with butterflies in her chest, and the ache of not knowing, of not being known, ever truly went away. Even as life unfolded into marriage and motherhood and the quiet, steady rhythms of domesticity. And it wasn't until she was much older, after a fall left her with more time in bed and less strength to move around the house, that she finally returned to that old wooden box in the back of her closet, the one that held a few yellowed scripts, black and white photographs, and the thin bundle of letters tied in ribbon, untouched for decades. And as she read them again, with fingers trembling from time rather than nerves, she felt the warmth of a different life unfold all over again: the backstage jokes, the late-night phone calls from payphones, the time he held her waist during a screen test just a beat too long, and the moment she realized he would choose his future over her, not because he didn't love her, but because the world wouldn't let him love her out loud. And in rereading those moments, she didn't feel regret, she felt gratitude, because what they shared, however hidden, had been real, had sustained her when the world turned cold, had reminded her through years of quiet anonymity that once someone who mattered had truly seen her. And as the days grew quieter and visitors fewer, she decided not to die with the secret still hidden. So one afternoon, she sat with her granddaughter, the one who looked most like her when she was young. Curious and unafraid, and she told her everything, starting not with his name, but with a smile and the words, "I want to tell you about a boy who danced like he had wings," and as her voice cracked and her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of recognition, she watched as her granddaughter listened, not just with ears, but with awe. And in that moment she knew that even if the world never knew what they were to each other, even if their names were never linked in the annals of Hollywood's romances, she had passed the truth to someone who would remember, and that was enough, that was everything.